Good morning, afternoon, or evening, cats and dogs. Today's video is going to focus on the lesson 6.1 guided notes on solving one-step equations by addition and subtraction. Please make sure you have these guided notes in front of you and you're copying down not only the solutions but also the work that goes with these problems. This is a really foundational concept. This is something that we'll be talking about in class as well. We'll also be spending some time during our live session on Friday doing some additional practice through quizzes. But I really want to make sure that you have a solid foundation in solving one-step equations by addition and subtraction. Because later on this unit, we're going to be doing inequalities with this, and we're also going to be doing two-step equations that involve both addition and subtraction. So it's a very important concept. Remember that you can use your guided notes as you can use your guided notes for any graded classwork. Sorry, you should also use your calculators to work through these problems. So you don't have to calculate any of these things by hand or mentally. You can certainly do that and then just double check it using a calculator. So please make sure you have that handy as well to practice plugging these things into the calculator also. You will get a practice worksheet on this lesson so that you'll have a chance to practice this both in class and outside of class as well. So first things first, I do want to introduce the addition and subtraction properties of equality. The addition property of equality says that if you add the same number to each side of an equation, then the two sides remain equal. So we kind of did this when we were doing our pre-lesson 6.1 notes in terms of showing the same operation on both sides of the equation. The subtraction property of equality says that if you subtract the same number from each side of an equation, the two sides remain equal. So if we do the same thing to both sides of an equation, both sides are going to remain equal, which makes sense. It's going to keep it balanced. So let's go ahead and do some exercise problems or some example problems on solving one-step equations. You'll notice that there are some examples that are shown for you and some that we're going to work through together. So question number 1 is one that is shown for you, and it says in the directions, to solve each of the following equations, show your inverse operations. You should always show your work, always show your inverse operations. Eventually, I do hope for you to get to the point where you don't necessarily need to list what's happening to the variable, as I'm going to highlight in yellow here, and the inverse. But at this point, I'm still going to jot this down for each of these questions, at least for the first half of this unit. So number 1, our equation is x plus 12 equals negative 5. What's happening to the variable is we're adding by 12. So we're adding 12 to the variable x. Remember, there are two inverses, and we make one change to make an inverse. So your inverse is either to subtract by 12 or add by negative 12. So I actually showed both, but you would only need to represent it one way underneath. So you can either subtract 12 from both sides or add negative 12 to both sides. Now, assuming you use the inverse operation, since the inverse of adding by 12 is to subtract 12, this should cancel out and become 0. Plus 12 minus 12 becomes x plus 0. Now, I don't typically write this step. I'll automatically go to the final solution, so you'll see that in all the future examples. But you'll end up with x at the end. And that's our goal, is to isolate the variable. On the right-hand side, I'm going to highlight this in blue. This is what you would be plugging into the calculator. Either negative 5 minus 12 or negative 5 plus negative 12. So again, in your calculator, and please practice doing this, because some of my students will say, oh yeah, well, I know how to plug it in, and then come test or quiz time or something that's graded, they don't really know how to plug it into the calculator. So practice plugging this in. Negative 5 plus negative 12, with or without the parentheses, or negative 5 minus 12. And make sure that you're using the subtraction sign for subtraction or minus, you're using the negative key for any negative numbers. You should get negative 17. So x is negative 17. Now the good news is you can check your solutions. So grab your calculator again, replace x with negative 17. Do negative 17 plus 12, hit equals. If it does not equal negative 5, then your solution's incorrect. So you need to go back and look at your inverse operations again. As long as it equals what's on the opposite side of the equation, you're good to go. All right, number 2, negative 18 equals g minus 26. So the thing that's happening to the variable here is we're subtracting by 26. And I know it's kind of hard to tell the difference between subtraction and a negative, but again, we're subtracting 26. The inverse of that is to add 26. Remember, you could also do subtract a negative. So you're going to notice now I just retyped the equation again just to make my work a little easier to show, but I'm going to show plus 26 on each side. So again, on this right-hand side, because I use the inverse operation, it's going to cancel out, and we're going to be left with g on the right-hand side. But what you want to plug into your calculator is what I'm going to highlight in blue. It's going to be negative 18 plus 26. When you do that, you get 8. So your solution is g equals 8 or 8 equals g. I do often have students who ask, well, is it okay if I write 8 equals g? Do I have to flip it around? You don't need to flip it around, but 8 equals g is equivalent to g equals 8. Hi, Oliver. Yeah? Yeah. All right, so for this question, again, you're going to get g equals 8. One way you can check your solutions is to do 8 equals 26, hit the equal sign, and see if it equals negative 18, and it should. Sorry about that. My 2.5-year-old, almost 3-year-old, running in trying to tell me how excited he is. All right, number 3, we've got negative 14 plus y equals 31. What's happening to the variable is we're adding by negative 14. So the inverse of that is to add a positive 14. Again, I do hope for you to get to the point where you can just work through this mentally. I don't ever have to show this when I'm solving equations, but since this is really our first foray into this, I think it's a good idea for us to show this work at least for the first half of the unit. So again, I'm going to show plus 14 on both sides. It's going to cancel out on the left where the variable is. On the right, I'm either going to do this mentally or plug it into my calculator, and I'm going to end up getting 45 for my solution. So 31 plus 14. Remember, do negative 14 plus 45, hit equals, make sure you get 31. It's a good way to just quickly double check your solution. In number 4, I really do suggest adding the opposite. So rewriting this as z plus 29 equals negative 74. So what's happening to the variable is add by 29. Now, if you have minus a negative 29, that's okay. Your inverse should still be the same, either subtract 29 or add a negative 29. So you're going to notice I subtracted 29 from both sides. It'll cancel out here. And what are you plugging into your calculator? Negative 74 minus 29. Again, you might be like, is that a negative or a minus? Well, we were subtracting 29 from both sides. So think negative 74 minus 29. If you're ever struggling to figure out whether it's subtraction or negative, read it aloud or read it to yourself and think about what makes sense. You wouldn't say negative 74, negative 29. You'd say negative 74 minus 29. So plug that into your calculator. You get z equals negative 103. All right, moving right along. Question number 5. H minus 62 equals negative 36. We're subtracting 62 from the variable h. So the inverse of that is, I'm going to leave a little space there. So we're subtracting 62. The inverse is to add 62, or you could subtract a negative 62 as well. But we're going to add 62 as the inverse of subtracting 62. So add 62 to both sides. Again, on the left-hand side, this is going to cancel out. That's why we use inverse operations, to isolate our variable h. So in your calculator, you're going to plug in negative 36 plus 62. That's going to get us h equals 26. All right, number 6 is already done for us. What's happening to the variable b is we're adding by negative 18. The inverse of that is to add positive 18, so you can see we do that on both sides. It's going to cancel out on the right to leave you with b, and then do 27 plus 18 to get 45 for your solution. Again, you can leave it like this or write it with the variable on the left. When we do inequalities, it's going to be important to switch it as a separate step, because you're going to also have to flip the inequality symbol around. An equal sign means the same no matter which direction we point it or we have it written. But with inequality symbols, it changes the meaning. So I just want to stress that as we move on towards inequalities, don't just move the variable to the left and the number to the right without switching the inequality. That's going to be really important moving forward. All right, we're almost halfway done with our examples. We're only going through number 14 here because I don't want to put too much on your plates at this point. I want to make sure we have a good understanding of solving one-step equations before we move on to our word problems and things that are more complicated. So number 7, we have negative 55 equals r plus 49. What's happening to the variable is we're adding by 49. The inverse is to subtract by 49. So I'm going to subtract 49 from both sides. It's going to cancel out on the right. On the left, that's what I'm plugging into my calculator. Negative 55 minus 49. Again, negative 55 minus 49. And I cannot stress enough to make sure you're practicing plugging this into your calculator, because a lot of times the students have the correct work, but their solution is wrong because they're not sure how to plug it into the calculators correctly. You should get r equals negative 104 or negative 104 equals r. Number 8, negative 78 plus a equals negative 38. What's happening to the variable is we're adding by negative 78. The inverse is to add a positive 78. So we'll do that to both sides. So on the left-hand side, this is going to cancel out. On the right-hand side, what you're plugging into your calculator is negative 38 plus 78. Again, negative 38 plus 78. And this is going to get us a equals 40. All right, next to number 9, f minus 27 equals 39. What's happening to the variable is we're subtracting 27. The inverse of that is to add 27. So let's show that to both sides. Again, this is going to cancel out on the left-hand side. So what you plug into your calculator is 39 plus 27. We should end up getting a solution of f equals 66. Number 10, I am going to start by adding the opposite and rewrite this as e plus 22. So what's happening to the variable is that we're adding 22. The inverse of that is to subtract 22 or add a negative 22. Both are correct. So we're going to show plus a negative 22 on each side. Again, subtracting a positive 22 is correct as well. I just want to show it more than one way. Hi. So on the left-hand side, we're going to have these 22s cancel out. On the right-hand side, we're going to do negative 51 plus negative 22 in our calculators. And we should get E equals negative 73. All right, next two questions. Number 11, we have negative 14.8 plus G equals negative 21.6. What's happening to the variable is we're adding negative 14.8. The inverse of that is to add a positive 14.8. So we'll show that on both sides. Again, it's going to cancel out on the left-hand side where the G is. In your calculators, you're going to do negative 21.6 plus 14.8. So again, in your calculators, negative 21.6 plus 14.8. And our solution will be G equals negative 6.8. Number 12, what's happening to the variable is we're subtracting 18.21. The inverse is to add 18.21. So you're going to see that I'm going to do plus 18.21 on both sides. On the left, the variable, or sorry, not the variable, but the 18.21s will cancel out. We're going to do negative 14.6 plus 18.21. In your calculator, negative 14.6 plus 18.21. You should get D equals 3.61. All right, last two before I give you a little bit of independent practice to finish this video. We've got negative 4 3/4 plus G equals negative 2 5/6. What's happening to the variable is we're adding negative 4 3/4. The inverse of that is to add a positive 4 3/4. So you're going to see that I'll do plus 4 3/4 to both sides. The 4 3/4 on the left-hand side will cancel out, leaving you with G. What you will plug into your calculator. Remember, if you're still not able to plug this into your calculator, please let me know. Ask me. Show me your calculator. We can make sure you know how to plug it in. You're going to plug in negative 2 5/6 plus 4 3/4. Negative 2 5/6 plus 4 3/4. So if you're using the ABC button, as it is in a lot of calculators, and we can spend some time showing you how to use that in class, you're going to be using the ABC key more than once. Some of you may have to hit the second or shift key to be able to get the 3 boxes to pop up on your screen and fill in those boxes with the numbers. This is something that we'll hopefully have practiced in class a little bit prior to you taking or watching this video and taking the guided notes or working through it in class, but something you want to definitely be familiar with. And we end up getting G equals 1 and 11/12. All right, last one here. Y plus 3 and 1/5 equals negative 5 and 4/9. What's happening to the variable is we're adding 3 and 1/5. The inverse is to subtract 3 and 1/5. Let's show that on both sides. It's going to cancel out on the left-hand side. What you're going to plug into your calculator is negative 5 and 4/9 minus 3 and 1/5. Negative 5 and 4/9 minus 3 and 1/5 to get negative 8 and 29/45. All right, so what I have for you is 4 questions that I want you to try. Pause the video, try these 4 questions. I would suggest listing what's happening to the variable and the inverse side by side. We'll talk through that when we resume after you've worked through these problems. Okay, hopefully you've worked through these 4. So number 1, what's happening to the variable is subtract by 19. So one possible inverse is to add 19. Remember, there's 2 possible inverses, but we can add 19 to both sides. Negative 37 plus 19 is going to get us negative 18 for our solution. Number 2, what's happening to the variable is plus 26. The inverse is to subtract 26. So in your calculators, you'll do negative 45 minus 26 to get A equals negative 71. Number 3, what's happening to the variable is add negative 17.2. So the inverse is to add a positive 17.2. So you're going to do negative 6.7 plus 17.2 to get B equals 10.5. And finally, you're adding 4 and 3/4 is what's happening to the variable. So the inverse is to add a negative 4 and 3/4 or subtract 4 and 3/4. So in your calculators, you're going to do negative 2 and 1/3 minus 4 and 3/4 or plus a negative 4 and 3/4 to get R equals negative 7 and 1/12. Now, I cannot stress enough, and I know I've already said it multiple times, but you will get practice both in class and outside of class, and an additional practice sheet on this. So you will have a lot of opportunities to practice this skill because it is so important moving forward for the rest of our unit. If you're not able to solve these one-step equations, you won't be able to do the inequalities, you won't be able to do the two-step equations. So if you're struggling with this is where you need to ask for help, get some additional practice during Zoom office hours, get it during class time, ask for it during academic enrichment, during morning homeroom, any of those times when you could possibly get additional assistance. Thanks for listening.